Welcome to Generations at Work, where our goal is to build bridges and not walls between the different generations in the workplace. Today, we're going to explore a topic that affects every generation, and that is accountability in the workplace. Before we get started, if you're interested in learning more about how to lead different generations in the workplace, or perhaps you want a workshop or coaching for your teams, please visit maxwellleadership.com/generations at work. We also have an added value to you. We have created a downloadable free Generations at Work playbook that you can access at maxwellleadership.com/generations at work. I'm your host, Susan Davis, and with me today, our generational expert, Dr. Tim Elmore. Dr. Elmore is an international speaker and author of A New Kind of Diversity, making the different generations on your team a competitive advantage. And you can pick up that book at maxwellleadership.com. And that's really, again, what we want to talk about in this podcast. How do we make your team a competitive advantage? Welcome, Tim.
Thanks, Susan. Great to be with you. Always good to be with you.
Always great to be with you too, Tim. So here's the truth. Accountability means different things to different people. Ask my children about this, right? And when those people span four different generations, the gap in expectations and values and communication can create some serious problems in our workplace. So whether you're leading a team or working within one, we are trying to elevate our own performance and understand how accountability is perceived across the generations. It's not only helpful, it's critical as we move forward as leaders in the workplace. So let's just jump in, Tim. How do you find accountability in today's multi-generational workplace?
Yeah. Well, I'm going to start with a simple working definition that I think would work for any generation, but you're absolutely right when you say we look at it very differently. And by the way, if I'm a Gen Zer at work, the youngest team member, I might look at accountability from my boss if I think he or she distrusts me in a negative way, only because of the distrust. It's what we talked to David Yeager about the other day, the enforcer mindset, the mentor mindset. So here's my simple working definition. It's something you could look up anywhere. It's the acceptance of responsibility for your own actions and decisions and the willingness to be transparent. So let me say that again. It's the acceptance of responsibility for your own action and decisions and the willingness to be transparent about them. And by the way, isn't this something we wish for when we
Thank you.
elect leaders in Washington, D.C.? In fact, I'll give you a couple of quick examples that will be good fodder for conversation. Couple of presidents, actually every president made mistakes, but a couple of presidents that made a pretty significant mistake handled it very differently. One was accountable, one wasn't. So way back in 1961, John F. Kennedy was president of the United States, and he endured what we now call the Bay of Pigs fiasco. It was a failed attempt to attack an enemy, and he went through it, and it was awful, and we looked like knuckleheads. But afterwards, JFK's popularity went up. In fact, he was even quoted as saying, it's funny, the more mistakes I make, the more they like me. Well, it wasn't the mistakes we liked. It was because right afterwards, he got on the airwaves and said, I take full responsibility. This was my bad. No, but not my officers, not my soldiers, blah, blah, blah. This was my bad. I'm going to own this, and we're not going to let it happen again. Well, people loved that. They didn't love the mistake. They loved a leader that was accountable. Fast forward. Without attempting to throw anyone under the bus, I think most of us who are over 40 years old remember 1998 and our president, President Clinton, went through the Monica Lewinsky fiasco. Do you remember this?
I do.
This White House intern, and what was he doing? It was inappropriate. And remember, he got on the airways and at least initially said, I did nothing wrong. I did not have sex with that woman, blah, 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 blah. Later turns out he did. When he finally made this 5-minute speech where he had to recognize and acknowledge what he had done. And by the way, that was the shortest speech he'd ever given, 5 minutes. Who wants to belabor?
Any politician, yeah.
But it's interesting. I had several people, Susan, contact me after this speech and said, something seemed to be missing. I emailed back and I said, I'll tell you what it is. I looked at the words. an apology. He
Mhm.
talked about, we should move on. This isn't such a big deal, blah, blah, just all kind the things that leaders tend to say.
Mhm.
And by the way, there's so many great qualities about Bill Clinton, but in that moment, what we really needed to hear was, "I am so sorry, America. I have
Accountable.
wronged my wife. I have wronged my daughter. I have wronged you, and I'm going to own this. That was not presidential." Blah blah blah. His popularity would have gone up. And it wasn't
Mhm.
because we loved the mistake. It's because we loved an accountable leader. So I'm going to stop there, but
Yeah.
I'm telling you, it's a must, and we've got to have it all the way around our workplace. Yeah.
And I think that accountability leads to authenticity. And we
Yes.
know
Yeah.
that authenticity is one of the key factors with really successful leaders. So
Yeah.
when we're authentic and accountable, we become relatable, which
It's
drives our
true.
influence up.
Yeah.
Okay. So where do you think there are accountability clashes maybe between different generations? And what drives that disconnect? What drives that wall instead of us building the bridge?
Yeah. Well, one of them I kind of alluded to just a minute ago. The youngest team members in their 20s can easily interpret a healthy gesture of accountability from their boss as micromanaging. You don't
Mhm.
trust me. What's wrong? That sort of thing. And they might even feel, pardon me, they might even feel triggered because this was an attack on you. Whereas we're going, no, this is what we all do. We all hold each other accountable here. So I want to go back to something David Yeager said in an earlier podcast, who has done primary
Phenomenal.
research on this. We can approach our people, these are my words, not his, as a manager or as a mentor. And I'm lobbying for a mentor, and so is Susan here.
Mhm.
So if you're just a manager, first of all, it could be perceived as you're just trying to make sure I don't make any mistakes. You don't really care, and any gesture of accountability seems like an attack on me. By the way, I've not ever met one person that says, "Would you just manage me? Would you manage me today?" They don't say that. They
Sign me
say,
up.
"Would
Mhm.
you mentor me?" Yeah. So the right mindset really is a mentor mindset where we say, "I've given you this job because I have high expectations. I know you can do this. And because I know, I'll be checking in just to watch your progress." Now, you see,
Mhm.
that's accountability, but you profiled it in a very positive way. Now, if they
Yeah.
make a mistake, you want to know right away so you can amend it or correct it.
Mhm.
But we've got to make sure we're using language of belief. You know what I believe, Susan? I'm going to just say this. One of our
Just say,
habitudes is called surgeons or vampires. We approach a younger generation either as a surgeon or a vampire. Surgeons are going to do a surgery and draw blood, but it's to take out a tumor. Vampires take out blood and it is reckless and careless, and the person's dead when they're done. I know this is very, very weird here, but I think what we need to do is make sure that we're very surgical, and we make sure that we're profiling it out of belief, not relief. So I think we often confront people or hold them accountable
mhm.
with one of two postures. We're either doing it out of relief to relieve our own tension, our own frustration with them, our own disbelief that they're getting it done. That's relief. Or we do it out of belief. I'm approaching them fully believing they're going to come through in the end, even though they might stumble a little bit on the way. But those two postures are very, very different.
And I think they are different, but I think that comes from, are we a culture of blame or are we a culture of curiosity and empowerment? And especially, where we have people pointing fingers at each other. And what we do know is that micromanagement yields those resistant behaviors. So if you're a leader that is blaming and shaming, then of course they're going to feel that. But if you're a leader that's just having that culture of ownership, that's empowerment.
Yeah, it really is. And I think that's the approach we got to go for. Now,
Yeah.
I do find a paradox in younger team members. I'm assuming that maybe some of our listeners are perhaps over 40. Please forgive me if you're not. Um, Here's the paradox. Generation Z enters their career wanting lots of feedback and check-ins and even affirmation, if I may say
Mhm.
so. But eventually they cross a line and they don't want that. It feels like micromanagement. So just know early on, micromanage, but do it out of belief. But later, read the tea leaves, read the signals they're
Mm.
giving you. they'll want you to trust them. And when you check in, it actually feels like distrust. So Gen Zers have told me in focus groups this thing on the idea of accountability and feedback. They would say, I guess I'm okay with my boss holds me accountable, but you can't have it both ways. If
Yeah.
you hold me accountable, you need to be an accountable leader. We just talked about
Mm,
JFK and Bill Clinton,
yeah.
and there was a little bit different feeling from the followers from both
Mhm.
of those. So leaders, I know this should go without saying, but if you hold others accountable, make sure you're
You're
communicating with
doing it too.
your visibility and your verbiage. I'm willing to be held accountable myself. Yeah.
Yeah, as John would say, people do what people see,
Yeah,
right?
that's right. It's
That's
so
right.
true. Yeah.
So let's start with the boomers here a little bit.
Okay.
So boomers come from that, let's just get it done. This is the way we do it, right? They have that mindset. How does
Yeah.
that influence how they give or receive accountability? Because I do think there's some differences,
Yeah.
especially giving and receiving with boomers sometimes.
Yeah, I do too. My belief is, Susan, and again, this is just me, but my belief is that this mindset, get it done, only works if it's paired with a mindset, management by objective. When I
Hmm.
say that, I mean, I want Austin or Jessica, my Gen Zer on the team, to get the job done. But I should also say, and because I believe you're going to get it done, I'm going to manage by objective, meaning here's the goal. And I'm not going to micromanage and say, do the 6 steps that I tell you. I need to learn to say, and I'm willing to let you get to that goal in the way that you see best. Now, this probably requires they've had a little experience with you, not this is
Hmm.
day one. But I feel as though we can have a get it done mindset if we also have, I'm going to let you get to that goal. But now be sure and get to the goal. One of our habitudes is called clean windows. And here's what we say in the habitude. When you say clean windows, is clean a verb or an adjective? Meaning, are you saying
Hmm.
clean the windows and here's how to do it? Or are you saying, in the end, I want some clean windows. You can get to it however you want, but just make sure at the end, I got clean windows. They love to be trusted like that. So, and I don't know, this is a parenting principle as well as a leadership principle, but I think we need to trust them a little bit more as they show they're trustworthy.
Okay, and parenting is leadership
Yeah,
for sure, for sure.
yeah, no
So
doubt.
I recently working with a team, and uh, the supervisor or the leader was younger than some of the people on the team,
Yeah.
and and probably right at the boomer age. And oftentimes, and we talked about this earlier, the mental health, feeling he's irrelevant, he's
Yeah.
feeling, attacked when he's held accountable, and those things. So, how can leaders hold those boomers, the older maybe, and maybe it is even somebody that's just a Gen Z to a millennial or millennial to an Xer, whatever it is. But
Yeah.
how can we hold them feeling that accountability without that disrespect of experience because they've had so much experience, but yet we're younger than them, but we need
Yeah.
to hold them accountable, but we don't want it to seem like micromanagement or disrespect.
No doubt
How
about
does
it.
that, how do we do that?
Yeah, this is a growing number. More than half of millennials are now saying, I'm in a leadership position. And
Yeah.
of those more than half, most of them say, and I'm leading people that are older than me. Susan, I'm going to say something off the record. We need to do a whole podcast on this one, leading generations that are older than you,
Ooh, that's a
where
good
you're
one.
now feeling like I could be their daughter or their son. And yet I'm telling my dad or my grandpa how to do this. So, a couple of things. I just did a blog post on this, and I'm going to just kind of summarize what I said in the blog post. First, let me say, I remember being in a situation like this with John Maxwell. I was in my 20s. He was clearly my boss, but he had put me in charge of a couple of things that now I was running point. And
Hmm.
I noticed that we were doing something that he had initiated that I thought, I think there's a better way. Well, you can imagine this is John Maxwell. Dr. John C. Maxwell, you know? So I'm thinking, I am in no way, shape, or form willing or able to lead this guy. But here's the steps I followed. Number one, I knew I had to lead with humility.
Hmm.
So I don't come in saying, here's what we got to do. Just write it down, buddy.
Hmm.
I want to go in with humility, saying, gee, I'm going to need you to weigh in on this. You have so much more experience than me, but here's what I think might need to happen, or here's how I think we need to get to the goal. Humility is going to make a huge difference on their receptivity of my
Hmm.
leadership. Secondly, uh, make the mental jump. If you're in charge of someone older than you, you need to promote yourself mentally and say, I am the leader. I don't need to shirk or shrink from that role. If I'm the leader, I need to step up and wear the pants. So
Mhm.
humility, yes, but don't be afraid to step up and make that mental jump.
Mhm.
I would say meet quickly if you're in charge of someone older to clarify expectations. If you go into a meeting and they feel like, who are you, buckwheat, or to lead me right now, I think it would have been helped had you met with them one on
Mhm.
one, and say, could we talk over this? And by the way, I love how Bob Iger took over Disney. When he first took over Disney almost 20 years ago, he met with his underlings and said, you have more experience than I do in this. Tell me what you think we ought to do. You're good at
Yeah.
animation. You're good at plush toys. You're good at theme park tickets. And they leaned in to help him because he was so willing to say,
Mhm.
I want your help. So clarify expectations and be willing to say, I need you and expect you to do this, and I'll do that.
Mhm.
I've said this already, but another one is manage by objective when you can. In other words, say, here's the goal. I'll let you, older team member, get to it however you want to. I'm not going to micromanage you.
Yeah.
And then a couple of others. One, get alignment one on one. Whenever you feel like there's misalignment, I feel like it's always wise to get one on one. Nobody's listening, so nobody has to put on a show for others, and make sure in that one meeting you're getting some alignment. And then the last advice I would give if you're leading people older than you is really work on your EQ.
Mm.
Um, if you're leading people older than you can't adjust your IQ too much. Sorry, but you
Mhm.
can adjust your EQ, your emotional intelligence, your self-awareness, your social awareness. Be good with people. And I think
Mhm.
if you're going to be if you're good with people, you're going to do it. And by the way, it paid off. When I met with John, I treated to the breakfast. I started with humility. I did those steps. And I said, John, just think about it. It may be way off, but just think about it. And sure enough, we met again. He goes, I think we should do that. And I thought, hallelujah. Thank God for a secure leader who was older, but I had to step up and say, I think this idea might be the best. So I'll
Well,
stop.
and part of that emotional intelligence is self-awareness, and it's being built by the reflection and the feedback. And so
Yeah.
he got the feedback, reflected on it, and
Hmm.
and then was able to meet you there.
Yeah.
Now, I'm Gen X, so
Okay.
we are very independent. We're very skeptical sometimes, and I think that can go a long way with giving and receiving feedback because
Yeah.
I feel like since I started in the world of the modern workplace over 25 years ago, there's been so many different leadership
Yeah.
models,
Yeah.
philosophies, all these things over 25 years.
Yeah.
How do you get someone like me, a Gen Xer, to buy in? Because remember, we're skeptical. When
Yeah.
we've seen such changing philosophies
Yeah.
around leadership, what's the key to get the Gen X bought in?
Well, I think to admit what you just said is the starting point. They've seen a lot come under the bridge, a lot of water
Yeah.
go under the bridge. So we need to stop sugarcoating or mincing words and going, "Oh, it's going to be great." You read that like, "Come on, buddy." So I would say, remember in one of our earlier podcasts, Susan, we talked about the mantra of Gen X, keep it real.
Keep it real.
You're right. You are pragmatic. You're very authentic and keep it real. So I would say make sure that you do keep it real and that you don't sugarcoat things. And by the way, one of the pieces of advice we gave on an earlier podcast is if you have good news and bad news, do the hard news before the easy news. Then they
Mhm.
know, okay, she's being honest with me or he's being honest along the way. They're being transparent. Gen X can be suspicious that the leader isn't being very transparent.
Yeah.
So you need to assure them, convince them that you're being transparent. But
Yeah.
Susan, I think you need to weigh in on this one. As an
Well,
Xer, talk about what you would want from a leader.
I tell you, I'm a discerner, so I
Yeah,
discern a lot. I watch people's actions unless I don't listen to their words. I'm very much about watching. But for me, it's authenticity. It goes back to that word authenticity.
yeah,
When I see a leader working as hard as I am or
yeah,
wanting me to, and admitting they're wrong and listening and feedbacking and going shoulder to shoulder with me and
yeah, yeah,
exploring
yeah,
that authenticity, I am much willing. I talk a lot about how do we give feedback to people. Well, we've got to give positive feedback
yeah,
as well as negative feedback. In
Yeah,
fact, I like the idea of building a feedback bank. It's one of the things I coach with my
that's
teams
good.
is we have to build a positive thing so that when we do have this accountability discussion and we do have this feedback discussion, it's more readily acceptable.
Yeah,
And I'm
that's
more
good.
willing to accept that from you if you're also giving me the positive stuff.
Yeah, I
So,
agree. That's good.
so Tim, I want to shift to the millennials. I was with a group on Monday, and it was a generational diversity course. We spent about 8 hours running through your book and some of this curriculum. But I started this session off, and I said, "Tell me what is your biggest trigger, or what is the thing that you see the most about a different generation in the workplace?" And I didn't say positive or negative. I wanted to see
Yeah,
what their response was. And I will say about 90% was negative.
yeah,
And this group was primarily millennial Z, but maybe 40% X, but then
okay,
the rest were millennial and Z. And I heard over and over and over again, millennials need too much hand holding.
yeah,
Millennials are soft.
yeah,
Millennials, they don't know, they don't like work. And we had a lot of millennials in the room, and there started to be a little bit of conflict. And I said, listen, this is just perceptions, right? What is this stereotype around millennials needing too much hand holding? What's
yeah,
the truth? And then how do we bridge that gap? Because there's a
yeah,
lot of walls being built. I see it all the time.
no doubt. Well, I think too often, let me say the bad news about the older generation, then I'll say the good news. The bad news is we do hear one story of they needed held, they needed their handheld, and we lump them all in together. We can't do that. However, think about it, the millennials were the very first generation where perhaps the majority of parents, we said, let's give them trophies just for showing up. We told them they were awesome for putting the spoon in the dishwasher. It was hyperbole, gold stars on the refrigerator. And we thought, oh, this is going to help their self-esteem. Well, it had a reverse effect in many, many cases. And their boss isn't going to clap for them because they showed up at work on time every day. So we do have to make that adjustment. Susan, I don't know if I ever told you this, but there is a company that I have consulted with, and I talked to the vice president of HR, who said we had to hire praise consultants from the outside because we couldn't give enough affirmation and couldn't hold enough hands along the way for the young team members. And I thought, oh my gosh, that's not a long-term solution. You can't keep hiring 1099s to give praise to
Yeah.
the team members. So let me say a couple of things, I think. I think leaders need to demonstrate to younger generations that we're willing to move from a gatekeeper style to a guide style. So, old style leadership, we were gatekeepers. And what I mean by that is we had all the power. We were C suite leaders. We had all the power. We were the gatekeepers of all that came and left the town, okay, so to speak. The guide style knows, ooh, they don't need a gatekeeper. As we said before, a musician doesn't need a record label to post their music. An author doesn't need a traditional publisher to write a book and publish it on Amazon or whatever.
You don't.
So the gatekeeper is fast departing. And what I think millennials and Gen Zers, for that matter, are really
Mhm.
looking for is a new style where we're guides, not gods, not
Mhm.
gatekeepers, and willing to, as you just said, to walk alongside of them. Now, we need to run point, but we're relational. We do want results, but we get to those results through building good, strong relationships.
Mm,
Trust is the currency of our day today, and I think we're just going to have to build that. Yeah,
I like that. Which leads me to the thought about trust is trusting in a hybrid, work environment. So what kind of challenges, and I feel like I'm hearing it in the field right now, more with that are unique to Gen Z, some millennials, but this is any generation, of course. But
yeah,
what accountability challenges are unique in hybrid or remote work environment?
yeah,
I think it's a big topic right now.
yeah, it is. Well, I think some of the challenges are we don't know how to communicate with each other very often, not all the time, because we have very different communication styles. We also can be misinterpreted, both sides, old and young. So we, as older generation leaders, might say, "Oh, I need to go hold that person accountable," and we think it's a neutral gesture to get productivity, and they feel attacked because they don't believe that we believe in them. In fact, I've heard Gen Zers in my focus group say, when my boss says, you act like you don't really care about your job, I want to say, you act like you don't really care about me.
Mm.
Now, granted, this is not Fellowship Hall. We're not just hanging out and singing Kumbaya,
Kumbaya.
but I think that relationship thing is a misinterpretation. So those would
Mm.
be the big challenges, and I think we're going to have to shore them up with an attitude of belief in each other, and we're going to have to really test out our communication and make sure we find something that we can align upon in terms of a communication platform and style.
Wonderful. Tim, so much good content. And I think you're right. We're going to have to do leading generations that are older than you in another podcast. We want to thank everybody for joining us today on Generations at Work. Again, where our goal is to build bridges and not walls between the different generations in the workplace. If you would like to download the free Generations at Work playbook, you can access that at maxwellleadership.com/generations at work. And you can also submit some information if you're interested in bringing generations at work into your organization to raise your leadership lid. Thank you so much.